and today we're going to be looking at baking with sourdough. So a sourdough starter is made by blending water and flour together and leaving it to ferment for a period of time. The yeasts naturally present in the flour multiply, and with careful nurturing and future additions of flour and water, your sourdough culture is established. Once established, your natural yeast will live happily in the fridge between bakes. Every time you want to make bread, you take a small amount of your natural culture, mix it with some flour and water from your bread recipe, and leave it to ferment. Okay, so this is our sourdough starter, which is going to live in the fridge and provide us with an ongoing amount of natural yeast. So every time we want to make bread, we're going to take a small amount of our starter that we've stored in the fridge, mix it with some flour and water from our recipe, and make ourselves a lovely active yeast ferment that I've got here.
Can you hear better now? Sorry Julia, I've never done this before.
That's okay. So in here we've got 50 grams of our sourdough starter, and I've mixed it with 150 grams of this Emmer flour. And the Emmer flour is a whole grain flour from Doves Farm, and it will really help to increase the nutritional value of your sourdough. So here we've got 150 grams of the Emmer flour, 50 grams of our sourdough starter, and 225 grams of water. I've got some recipe sheets here which has got all the details about the full recipe for you to take away and have a go at home. So this is the ferment that I mixed up last night, and I've left it to ferment. So typically the sourdough process begins the day before you want to make your bread. It's not a difficult process to do, it's very easy, but does require a little bit of extra pre-thinking about exactly when you want to make your bread, because typically the process is going to begin the day before you want to bake it. So into our ferment I'm going to add an additional 150 grams of water. Give it a good mix up, and as we mix it up, and you can see all the bubbles which show that the yeast is lovely and active. And this is our yeasted water, naturally yeasted water, that we're going to use to bake our bread with. So here in the bowl I've got 475 grams of the Doves Farm white flour. So this is a blend of the white flour and the Emmer to make the loaf, and this is the loaf that we're going to be making today. So make a little well in the centre of your flour, and in here I've also got 2 teaspoons of salt. So that's 450 grams of white flour and 2 teaspoons of salt. And then the ferment, which has got 150 grams of the Emmer flour, 225 grams of water, and the 50 grams of sourdough. Now, when the sourdough is stored in the fridge, the yeast become dormant. And the reason that we mix it with some extra flour and water once we've got it out of the fridge is so that we can energise the yeast and increase the yeast population to make it ready for bread making. If you don't energise your culture like this before using it, then you're not going to get such a good result with your bread making. Now, when you're using a wholemeal flour in with your white flour, not only does it increase the nutritional value of the bread, but it gives your bread a little extra character and makes it taste delicious. Now the wholemeal flour takes a little bit longer to absorb the water. So when you first start to mix the dough, you might find that it starts to look a little bit dry, but with a little bit of work, just pressing down with your knuckles, you'll find that dough will soon start to come together. Now, this recipe has been specifically designed for the first-time sourdough baker. So, because lots of people are put off working with sourdough because they find that the doughs are too wet to work with. You don't have to use a wet, sticky dough to start with. If you get used to the process using a dough with slightly less water, then you can start to grow in confidence with your sourdough, and then every time you use your sourdough, then try adding an extra tablespoon of water at a time so that you get a softer, stickier dough. So you can see now, but just by pressing down, how the flour is starting to become more hydrated with the water.
Do you want to show?
Just use your fingers to press down. You don't have to use any particular amount of effort. And then what we're going to do is we're going to leave this for 5 minutes, 5 or 10 minutes, just to rest. And we can see now that it's really starting to come together into a soft, sticky dough. So it looked quite dry to start with, but had we added any extra water to it at that stage, it would have become more difficult for us to handle. So the first time you make sourdough, try not to put too much water in it to start with, and you'll find the dough will be that much easier to work with for the first time. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put this to one side, and we'll come back and have a look at it in a moment. Okay, so while that's resting, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to make well, just how to prepare really some pitters and some pizza bread. So with the pizza and the pita bread, the quantities in the recipe are exactly the same, except for the fact that I've used all the Doves Farm white flour rather than adding the wholemeal to it as well. But in addition, I've added 2 tablespoons of olive oil, and this makes the dough more pliable and easier to work with. So I'm going to start off just showing you how to pre-shape the pita breads. So each pita bread, I use 50 grams of dough for each pita and 200 grams of dough for each of the pizza bases. Now what I like to do is use a little bit of the plain gluten-free flour to dust down onto my work surface. And what I find is by using the gluten-free flour is that it doesn't go all sticky when I start to use my fingers onto it. So what I've got here is 50 grams of dough that I made this morning, and I've just left in the box, and I'm going to show you how to shape it. So this is the first part of the shaping. Once your dough has rested, then we need to shape it. So just putting it down onto the surface, and I'm bringing in the sides to tuck into the centre so that it's stretching the skin on the underneath and helping to form a ball. So tuck the ends under, and then just draw it towards you along the surface and press down with your hand, and then you'll find a nice little ball shape is formed. Roll it in your gluten-free flour and leave it to rest. Just show you that one more time. So a little bit of flour down on the surface, very gently with your fingers, and draw in the edges of the dough to form a shape like this, a very, very rough shape. Drag your fingers underneath, and we start to form a little ball. A little bit of pressure with your hand, and then you've got your ball shape ready for resting. Roll it in the gluten-free flour and then pop it back in for resting again. Now, dough like this can just be rested at room temperature for up to about 4 hours, so it really has an opportunity to relax. Or if you want to, you can leave it in the fridge overnight and use it the next day. I quite often mix up a number of these, shape them all, pre-shape them like this, and then leave them in the fridge until I'm ready to bake them. So that's one of the main advantages of working with sourdough, is that because the yeasts do work very slowly, you can leave your shaped dough and it's just ready for you to use as and when you want it. So if you're going out to work, you can mix and shape your dough in the morning and then come home and get it out and bake it in the evening. So I'm just going to set those to one side. Now we're going to fast forward 4 hours. We're going to fast forward 4 hours, and this is what your dough will be like up. So you can see how they've softened and flattened. You can see how they've softened and flattened. And we're just going to put down a little bit of extra flour and softly flatten them. Because we've made them into a nice ball shape, they're going to form really nicely into nice round pitters like this that we're going to be able to slice and fill with lots of lovely healthy things for lunch. And they're brilliant when for just popping into the toaster in the morning. You can put a stack of them into the freezer in a bag, and then in the morning just get them out if you haven't got any fresh bread, put them in a toaster and they defrost straight away. So I've just flattened this down very gently with my fingers onto the flour, and then use a rolling pin just very quickly, one, and turn it, and fold it again and turn it. Now, it wants to be thin enough to be able to puff up and cook quickly in the fridge, but not so thin that you can see through it. You can see how easily that has rolled out, and that's because we've given it plenty of time to rest and relax. So I normally use this as a guide. It's not quite flat enough yet. And you're aiming for about 12 to 13 centimetres, something like that. So you can see how thick that is. Brush it with a little bit more flour, thank you. Brush it with a little bit more flour and then pop it flour side down onto your baking tray. I'm just going to show you that one more time. So a little bit of flour onto the board, flatten it down with your hand, turn it over, a little bit more flour on the top, and then roll it out very simply, pressing down and turning and pressing down again. And as I say, by using this gluten-free flour, it's not going to get sticky at all, and it makes it very, very easy to work and roll out. Just like that. Right, so I'm going to check I've got about the right size. That's about right, so it's quite handy to use a dough cutter like this. A little bit of flour over the top again, and then pop it flour side down onto your baking tray. Now I usually cook 4 of these in the oven at a time, and the good thing about using a baking tray like this is that you can use it much like a baker's peel. So you heat your oven up to about 250 degrees, really, really hot. Put into your oven, as it's heating up, a heavy roasting tin. I usually turn it upside down so it gets really hot. So you're putting your pitters onto a hot surface, and then use your tray to open your oven door, use your tray and push your pitters out like that. So they'll fall out really easily directly onto the hot surface. And then you just watch through the oven door as they start to puff up. They take about 4 minutes. You'll see that they'll start to puff up after about 2.5 minutes, and then leave them in there a little bit longer as the steam inside cooks the pitters from the inside out, and then you've got the extra heat from the oven to give them that nice little... So you want a little bit of colour on the outside, but not too much really. And the little bit of oil that's in the dough helps to keep that nice and soft. But you can see that they do puff up really nicely. So that's how to shape your pitters.
They are beautiful, aren't they?
They're so easy to do, and as I say, you can do a whole stack of them in one go, pop them in the freezer, and then they're ready for you to use whenever you want to. Right, so I'm going to go on and show you now how to do the flattened pizza bread. Okay. It's a similar process. Okay, right, lost my dough then. So again, this is some dough that I made up this morning, and this is the 200 grams of dough to make the pizza bread. So again, this is the pre-shaping part of it, the pre-shaping of the dough. It's partly developed. So we're shaping it in exactly the same way, bringing in the sides and pushing them down into the centre to form our ball. This is the same as if you were making a round loaf, a big round loaf at home, then you'd be doing your shaping in a similar way. So go all the way round, pushing it into the centre so that you're forming a skin on the outside. Let's just get rid of some of this flour. And then use a cupping motion with your hands to push it underneath. As I say, this is really good practice for if you're wanting to make a big white loaf, round white loaf. Draw the dough towards you, and you see you're getting a nice round shape. There we go. And that's your pre-shaping done for your pizza base. So again, we're going to leave this to rest, either at room temperature for 3 to 4 hours so that it really relaxes. And that's one of the things that I find that people say to me when they're making pizza, I can never stretch it out enough. And generally the issues that they're having with stretching it out is because they're not allowing the dough to rest enough to start with. And that applies to whether you're making sourdough, pizza base, or whether you're making a conventionally yeasted bread. Okay, so I'm going to pop that to one side to rest. And by the magic of television, very Blue Peter style, I happen to have a pizza dough that has been resting for 4 hours. And I'm not very good at judging how big something needs to be for the oven. So what I like to do is I use a silicone base like this as a template, and I'm actually going to cook my pizza in the oven on this silicone base, and it does help to give a nice finish to the bottom of the pizza because it conducts the heat really well. Again, as you notice, I'm putting a little bit of the gluten-free flour onto the base, picking up my dough, which as you can see is a lot softer. It was a big fat round ball and it's now relaxed down. Press it, put it down, smooth side down onto the base, and then start pressing it out from the middle. So you can see it's actually quite useful to have it on something so it moves around easily. And you can keep dipping your fingers into the gluten-free flour to stop them from sticking. You don't want to have too much flour on there, just enough to be able to stop them from sticking. So when you get to about this sort of size, what I tend to do is pick it up and stretch it. So you can see now, and then move your fingers slowly around the corners of the dough, and you can see that you're just allowing the natural weight of the dough to stretch the base out for you. And then pop it back down. You can see, so you can see how we're getting on now. And you can see how nicely developed the dough is by the big air bubbles in it. But this is pizza is a flatbread, so whilst the bubbles are nice, we don't want too many bubbles in there, because otherwise it's going to rise up with our bases on. It's making you hungry, yeah. Well, there's plenty to try here. Beautiful. Okay, so I'm pretty happy that that is almost round, and I've got my guide. 200 grams of dough like this is going to stretch out easily to about 25 centimetres, or thinner if you want it thinner. So the pizza that I've got here, I've actually cooked that pizza in a dry pan rather than in the oven, because the oven was a bit busy this morning. And so I used a dry frying pan, no oil or anything in it, and cooked the pizza in there for about 5 minutes on the underside. And then you can see that you get a nice crispy base to it when you do it like that. Alternatively, what I would do is put it into the oven. Again, I'd slide this onto my tray and then slide it into the oven onto another hot onto another hot baking surface. So if I was putting this in the oven, then at this stage I just load up all my toppings, whatever you want to put on it. Here, this one that I've done here, as soon as it came out of the pan after I'd flipped it over, I put about half a teaspoon of oil while the pizza topping was still hot, brushed it round, and then it's got some basil and salt and pepper. So it's a really quick, something that you can do really quickly if you've got guests coming or something. Then if you've got some dough stored in your fridge, then it's very easy to get it out and use it. Okay, so we're going to leave that now. So I'm going to come back now to have a look at how our dough has developed. So it's just been resting for 5 or 10 minutes while I've been showing you that. I'm just going to press it out now, and you can see that it has, all of the water has been absorbed now by the flour, and the dough is starting to take on a slightly softer roll. Now I'm going to just work it very, very simply like this with my fingers, pressing down and making sure that there aren't any dry patches of dough, dry patches of flour anywhere in the dough before I leave it to rest. There's no heavy kneading really with sourdough. It rests for long enough at room temperature for the dough to develop quite naturally. So now all I'm going to do at this stage is just roll it up like this. Very simply roll it up like that, and then I'll pop it into here. So I roll it up like this, and now I'm just going to rest it like that at room temperature for it to develop. If you want to, you can get it out and do another little pressing and rolling, but it's absolutely not necessary. I don't usually worry with that. I've got enough other things to do at home and that's one of the main advantages of sourdough, is that you can mix it and leave it and get on with all the other things that you need to do. So that's going to sit now at home for about 4 hours, 3 to 4 hours at room temperature, or in the fridge all day if you're going to work or going to bed or doing something a little bit more interesting. So, by the magic of television, this dough.
Just to show people again.
Okay, so if you can see, this dough is one that I've rolled up and left for 4 hours. I made this morning, and if we look on the underneath, then you can see how the dough has developed, and you've got these lovely air pockets. Okay, so we're just going to drop it out onto the work surface, and we're going to shape it very gently. Now, when I make a loaf like this, for a family loaf, it's really lovely to use a proving basket. Now, when you use a proving basket, it helps to support the dough And also you get this lovely stripy effect on the bread, which looks really attractive. So when you first get your basket, there's a new one here. So when you first get your basket, what you want to do is season it before you use it. So what I generally do to stop the dough sticking is that I give my basket a very, very light spray of flour. This is only for the very first time that you use it. And then I put in a tablespoon of a mix of the rice flour and wholemeal rye flour together. So I mix it together and put it into my little bowl, and then take a tablespoon of the flour, pop it inside, and then gently tap the flour around the proving basket, and that will help to stop the dough from sticking and also give this lovely stripy effect where the flour is inside the little grooves. So the first time, spray it with water and put your tablespoon of rice flour and rye flour mixed together, and that will help to season the outside of it. And then every time you make your bread and you use your basket, you pop another tablespoon of flour inside as well. So I've just very lightly pressed this out, and I've got my basket in front of me so that I've got a guide as to how to shape it and roll it up. Now I'm not going to worry too much about the shaping in terms of stretching the dough out a little bit. Make it easy for yourself. Roll it up and slightly stretch the outside. The dough's very, very soft and pliable. And then we've got a seam here at the bottom. I'm just going to draw the dough towards me again in a very similar way that we did when we were shaping the pitters. So just draw the dough towards you, and you're keeping your seam on the underneath and making a firmer surface on the top here. This is going to form the crust. So we want it to be a nice taut shape. Keep drawing it towards you. This is a very, very simple way of shaping your bread at home. Don't make life difficult for yourself and try to do any fancy shaping. It's not necessary. The basket's going to do all the support and the shaping for you. So offer up your basket, your dough, to see how we're doing shape-wise. And as you can see, just by tucking my fingers under, I've created a really nice smooth surface to my dough. So before I put the dough into the basket, I'm going to take a little handful of flour, rub it over the top, and again this is just going to help to stop the dough from sticking at all, although this isn't a particularly sticky dough, so it should be fine. Give it a little roll in the flour. So we've still got our seam on the underneath that we've tucked in, and our nice smooth surface, which is going to be the top of our bread. So we're going to put the smooth side down inside the basket and just slightly draw up the edges so that the folds are towards the top. Sprinkle the top of it with a little bit of flour, rub it down, and there you have it. So that's ready to rest now. And it's as simple as that. So don't make the shaping difficult for yourself. Just simply press the dough out very, very gently and then roll it up. Now to rest it, you need to cover it really so it doesn't form a dry skin on the outside. And using a shower cap like this fits really perfectly around the basket. So we're going to leave that now to ferment. Now, depending on how busy you are, what you're doing. If you want to leave that at room temperature, again, that will take anything between 2 and 4 hours, and it's going to increase in size by at least 50% and grow to be almost at the top of the proving basket. So I'm going to leave that to one side now. So when you come to, if you're going out and you wanted to leave the dough to develop slower, then you could just leave it in the fridge. Again, that's one of the advantages of working with the sourdough. So at the end of the, I'll bring this back again actually, because I haven't got a dough to show you that's been fully developed. So at the end of the development time, then you would just tip your dough out onto a basket and then put a couple of cuts into it or slice it however you want to. And you can see already that even though that's only been in there a few minutes, it's already started to form the stripes. And then slide it into the oven, and that will bake in the oven for about 45 to 50 minutes. I like to start it off at 250 degrees, really hot oven, for 5 or 10 minutes, and then turn the oven temperature down to 200 degrees for the remaining time. So let's just clean this up a little bit here.
I'm so sorry.
Sorry, that's okay. Don't worry, nothing to apologise for. Okay, so one of the great things about sourdough is that because of the slow fermentation process of the dough, lots of people find that eating sourdough bread is much easier for them to digest. And also sourdough bread has a lower GI rating than commercially yeasted white bread. So it's not only better for you, it tastes great too. So I hope that's given you a little snapshot into what it's like to bake with sourdough. It's a really lovely and easy process, and I think everybody should do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome, Claire.